Have you ever wondered why the people worth listening to are never the ones holding the microphone? Why the ones who speak with depth are almost always ignored, while the loudest, emptiest voices dominate the conversation? You turn on the news, a panel of shouting heads, interrupting each other every 5 seconds, arguing about things they barely understand. You scroll through social media, influencers selling you life wisdom in 15-second bursts, all noise, no substance. You hear 100 opinions, but you can't find a single original thought. And quietly, you ask yourself, where are the real thinkers? Where are the people who actually know what they're talking about? Where are the ones who aren't selling something, chasing clicks, or playing characters? Why do they never seem to be in the room? Why are the voices that could change the conversation never invited to the table? Why is every microphone handed to the clown and every thinker shown the door? You're not alone for noticing this. You're not broken. You're not bitter. You're simply awake in a world designed to distract. The truth is, you've probably been feeling this for years, that something's off, that the people getting the most attention are rarely the ones with the most insight. And somewhere deep inside, you started to wonder, is this just how the world works now? No, it's how the system is built, and it's working exactly as intended. Because the more you look, the more obvious it becomes. This world doesn't reward wisdom. It rewards volume, performance, conformity. It celebrates the bold, even if they're wrong, and silences the thoughtful, even if they're right. You've seen it. Experts cut off mid-sentence, truth-tellers mocked or ignored, the wise reduced to caricatures. Meanwhile, the shallow, the loud, and the certain get booked again and again and again. You watch it happen, and you feel something rise in your chest. Disbelief, disgust, but mostly a quiet kind of grief. Because deep down, you know what this means. It means we're building a culture that doesn't just tolerate stupidity, it elevates it. It means we've turned away from the minds who question and handed the stage to the ones who perform. It means that somewhere along the way we stopped asking, is this person wise? And started asking, will this person trend? And when you ask, where are the real thinkers? The answer hits harder than you expected. They're not on TV. They're not at the podium. They're not trending. Because they know better. Because they saw the cost of entering a system that doesn't want them. A system that punishes complexity, mocks nuance, and fears real reflection. So they left. Or they were never invited in. Either way, their silence isn't weakness. It's resistance. It's not that they're hiding. It's that the platforms don't seek them out. The cameras don't turn in their direction. The system doesn't reward their presence because the system was never built for them. It was built to keep you entertained, distracted, reactive. And real thinkers, they don't entertain. They challenge. They question. They make you uncomfortable. And that doesn't sell. So here we are, living in a world where the shallow are celebrated and the wise are forgotten. A world where being loud is more important than being right, where being agreeable is more valuable than being honest, where the smartest people you'll ever hear might never have a microphone in front of them. And the most dangerous part? Most people don't even notice, but you do. That's why you're here. You've begun to see through the noise. You've started to feel the weight of a culture that has silenced its deepest voices. You're asking the question most are trained to never ask. Where are the real thinkers? And the answer is not on TV. Not yet, but that might be about to change. TV doesn't choose people who understand the world. It chooses people who can distract you from it. It doesn't platform those who offer clarity, but those who manufacture chaos. You don't get invited to speak because you have insight. You get invited because you can make people feel something quickly, even if it's the wrong thing. The people who dominate the airwaves today aren't thinkers, they're performers. And what they perform is not truth, but theater. What do we see instead? We see influencers who build careers off of fake outrage and algorithm-fed drama. We see political figures whose main talent is turning fear into sound bites. We see experts who say in 8 seconds what should have taken 8 years of study. And we call that communication, we call that content, we call that news. But really, it's noise. Well-produced, addictive, hypnotic noise. You can feel it every time you tune in. No one's speaking with depth. They're speaking to win, to go viral, to dominate the segment. Because on modern TV, truth isn't the goal. Victory is, and victory belongs to the loudest. That's why panels don't invite thinkers, they invite debaters. That's why the calm are cut off and the dramatic are given time extensions. That's why volume replaces logic and emotion replaces evidence. You've seen it. You've watched someone, a professor, a doctor, a person who actually knows what they're talking about, start to speak, and then watch them get interrupted, misquoted, mocked, or worse, edited out completely, because what they said didn't fit the format, because truth takes time, and time doesn't trend. So instead, we get reality shows disguised as interviews. We get debates that are just shouting matches. We get experts chosen not for their wisdom, but for their ability to stir controversy in under a minute. And the people watching, they don't get informed. They get triggered. They don't leave understanding more. They leave feeling more, angrier, more afraid, more divided. Because that's what the system wants. If you're angry, anxious, and confused, you're easier to control. And the media knows it. They don't need to lie. They just need to keep you distracted. Keep you emotionally invested in things that don't matter. So you never notice the things that do. Because when you're busy watching the circus, you don't ask what's happening backstage. You don't notice the silence of the ones who should be speaking. You don't realize you've been given a cast of characters, not thinkers, not builders, not leaders, but entertainers. And entertainment, when it becomes your only source of information, isn't harmless. It's a form of soft manipulation. It's how you get a population that knows more about celebrities than history, more about scandals than systems, more about who said it loudly than what was actually said. And slowly, we begin to confuse volume with value, style with substance, familiarity with truth, until one day we stop asking questions entirely, because someone else is already yelling the answers. That's how it works. That's how people get convinced that truth is just a matter of opinion, and intelligence is just arrogance. That's how the wise get excluded, not with censorship, but with irrelevance. The more we reward noise, the more we drown out the signal. The more we reward the superficial, the more we punish the substantial. And in the end, the people with the most to say are the ones no longer invited to speak, because they're not profitable, they're not predictable, and they're not playing along. But this didn't happen by accident. There's a reason behind the noise. There's a mind behind the machine. And that's where we're headed next. This didn't happen by accident. There is a system behind the screen, a structure behind the circus, a mind behind the machine. What you see and what you never see isn't neutral. It's chosen, not by truth, not by wisdom, but by profit. Mass media doesn't reflect reality. It reflects who's paying for your attention and what they want you to believe. Because media today isn't in the business of truth. It's in the business of emotion, and emotion sells. The more extreme the headline, the more you click. The more you click, the more they profit. If it bleeds, it leads. That's not a slogan, that's a business model. The calm voice of reason, it doesn't trend. It doesn't spike ad revenue. It doesn't keep you hooked through the break. But outrage does, fear does, division does. And so what rises to the top is not the most thoughtful, but the most triggering. That's how media corporations make their money, by keeping you angry, anxious, distracted, and addicted. But they're not alone. Because the algorithm is their silent partner. And it's not just social media. It's cable news, it's YouTube, it's every platform that optimizes engagement over understanding. The algorithm doesn't know truth, it only knows traction. It doesn't care if what you see is helpful, only that you can't look away. And the result? Truth gets outperformed by spectacle. Information gets buried under noise. Because if the system can keep you scrolling, it doesn't care what you're learning. TV producers and algorithms now serve the same goal. Feed you what keeps you online, not what makes you think. That's why they book guests who fight, not those who reflect. That's why debates are designed to be unwinnable, because the point isn't resolution, it's ratings. That's why real thinkers are boring to them. They take too long, they use too many words. They don't make people feel fast. Meanwhile, the loudest voices are engineered for consumption. Short, sharp, simple. Us versus them. Always emotional, never nuanced. Because outrage doesn't require thinking, just reaction. And the more we react, the less we reflect. But there's one more layer, and it's the most dangerous of all. It's not just the media, it's not just the algorithm, it's the merging of both with political power. What we're witnessing isn't just entertainment, it's what scholars now call the political entertainment complex. It's when politicians become celebrities and celebrities become political mouthpieces. It's when headlines are coordinated, when narrative is engineered, when truth becomes optional, but emotional allegiance becomes mandatory. It's not a conspiracy, it's business, and business is booming. Noam Chomsky said it best. The smart way to keep people passive is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. That's exactly what we see. Dozens of pundits screaming across a narrow hallway. Left, right, liberal, conservative, but always inside the box. Step outside that box, gone. That's how real thinkers disappear. Not with violence, with silence. The system doesn't argue with them, it ignores them. Because thinking deeply is dangerous. It slows people down. It makes them harder to steer, harder to sell to, harder to govern. So instead of teaching people how to think, we entertain them out of it. We flood them with content until they drown in commentary and never realize what's missing. Not facts, not stats, but signal, the voices that don't shout, the ones that ask better questions, the ones that don't play sides because they're too busy searching for the truth. But those voices, they aren't viral, they aren't loud, they aren't lucrative, so the system erases them by simply refusing to show them. You don't need to ban a voice if no one knows it exists. You don't need to censor the truth if no one ever hears it. And slowly, we stop noticing that we've been trained to listen only to what was safe, what was shallow, what was already chosen for us. Because when the spectacle becomes the standard, substance becomes invisible. But if you've made it this far, you already feel it. You're not reacting anymore, you're watching. You're observing the machine from the outside. And that's where real clarity begins. The system doesn't need to lie to you, it just needs to make the truth boring. Because when something feels boring, you don't question why, you just tune out. And that's exactly the point. The truth isn't censored, it's made forgettable. Hidden behind headlines, buried beneath memes, stripped of context and drained of meaning. Not because it's false, but because it demands effort. And effort in a world of fast content feels like friction. This is how we're conditioned. We don't ask for depth, we ask for ease. And the system delivers on a silver platter. The psychologists call it cognitive ease. Your brain prefers what feels familiar, what's easy to process, what doesn't require work. So if something sounds simple, your mind assumes it's true. And if something is complex, it feels wrong, even when it's right. That's why television simplifies everything, black and white, left and right, Good guy, bad guy, cheer or cancel. No room for nuance, no patience for gray. Because gray doesn't trend. Gray doesn't fit the segment. Gray doesn't keep you watching through the next ad break. The system isn't broken, it's optimized. Optimized for simplicity, for certainty, for emotional speed. And so we grow up thinking that clarity means truth, when often it's just oversimplified nonsense. That's how we mistake confidence for competence, presence for value, familiarity for wisdom. We start believing that if someone shows up everywhere, they must be worth listening to. We confuse visibility with validity. We think, if they're on every screen, they must be right. But that's not how truth works. Truth isn't popular, it's not polished, and it rarely goes viral, because truth makes you pause. It slows you down. It asks questions you've been trained to avoid. And that feels uncomfortable, so we retreat. Back to noise, back to headlines, back to the people who make us feel certain, even if they're completely wrong. Because certainty feels safe, even if it's fabricated. Meanwhile, intelligence, real intelligence, doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always smile. It doesn't always have an answer. Sometimes it just sits in silence and waits. That kind of mind doesn't go viral. It doesn't entertain. It doesn't fit the format. So we never see it. Because in a world of emotional fast food, intellectual nutrition gets tossed aside. The deeper a thinker is, the less likely they are to simplify themselves for public consumption. They'd rather be misunderstood than dishonest. They'd rather be precise than popular. That's why they speak slowly, pause often, ask more than they answer. And to the modern viewer, that looks like weakness, or even worse, boredom. So we swipe away, and someone else gets the screen, someone louder, easier, more exciting. And just like that, we reward the shallow again. Not because we hate wisdom, but because we've been trained to feel uncomfortable around it. The system taught us to associate complexity with confusion, depth with arrogance, and real thought with unnecessary effort. So we look away from the voices that challenge us, from the questions that slow us down, from the people who don't want to entertain us, they want to awaken us, and we call them boring. When in fact, they're just not performing. They're thinking, carefully, quietly, deliberately. But no one taught us how to sit with that kind of mind, how to value patience over performance, substance over style, uncertainty over noise. So the thinkers fade from view, not because they disappeared, but because we stopped looking for them. And slowly, we built a world where the most thoughtful voices are the ones you never hear, not because they have nothing to say, but because they refuse to say it in 30 seconds, with a smile and a trending hashtag. And as we clap for the clown, we forget the sage ever existed. When the shallow are celebrated, the deep are forgotten. And when the deep are forgotten, a culture begins to collapse from the inside out. Because society doesn't just lose its wisdom, it starts to reward the opposite of wisdom, and that comes with a price. When we stop honoring those who think and start idolizing those who react, we become a people who react to everything and reflect on nothing. We're trained to respond, not to understand, to get angry, not to ask, to choose a side, not to search for the truth. And when reaction replaces reflection, we become predictable, controllable, divided, and worse, we become proud of it. We wear our ignorance like identity. We shout our opinions like they're facts. We cancel what we don't understand and reward whoever screams loudest. That's not culture, that's chaos, and it's no accident. It's the logical outcome of a system that elevates performance and ignores perspective, where media makes you feel informed without you ever learning anything real, where educating yourself just means picking a team and memorizing its slogans. So we end up living in a society that knows how to argue, but not how to think. And the cost? We start electing the loudest voices, not the wisest minds. We start trusting those who appear the most, not those who've studied the longest. We hand our attention to personalities, not principles, and suddenly, the wrong people are in charge of the biggest decisions. People who can win debates, but can't solve problems. People who know how to sell emotions, but have no idea how to build a future. That's how empires fall, not with bombs, but with applause for the wrong people. You see it in politics, in public health, in education, in the way we talk about truth. Everything starts sounding like a slogan, like a trend, like a performance. And meanwhile, the people who could help, the people with actual understanding, are pushed further out of the frame. They speak, but no one listens. They warn, but no one hears. They offer clarity, but it doesn't go viral. Because they're not entertaining enough. Because they don't provoke clicks. Because their answers require thought. And thought is now a liability. So we build a world guided by emotion, driven by optics, led by the easily outraged. And slowly, we lose something deeper. We lose the ability to recognize wisdom when we hear it. We lose our tolerance for voices that don't entertain us. We lose the instinct to stop and think before we speak, share, vote, or rage. And that loss, it's not abstract, it's not theoretical. It shows up in the ballot box, in the classroom, in the hospital, in the streets. It shows up in how we solve problems, or more often, how we don't. Because decisions are now made not by those who understand the full picture, but by those who best manipulate the moment. Short-term drama replaces long-term vision. Popularity replaces principle. Perception replaces performance. And as long as we keep mistaking noise for knowledge, we'll keep handing power to people who have no idea what to do with it. The people who should be shaping the world are busy being ignored by it. They're not on your feed, not on your screen, not in the conversations shaping policy, not because they failed, but because they refused to sell themselves the way the system demanded. They're invisible, not by accident, but by design. And we're all paying for it. Because when we silence the thoughtful, we don't just lose their voices. We lose direction. We lose nuance. We lose resilience. And we inherit a world that can no longer think for itself. But somewhere in the background, those minds still exist. Watching, waiting, thinking, not for applause, not for fame, but for the moment when the noise finally dies down and the signal can finally be heard again. The smartest people you'll ever meet won't be on television. They won't be on panels arguing over headlines they didn't write for audiences who don't want answers. They're not trending, they're not sponsored, they're not optimized for virality, because that's not what they're here for. They're reading, they're writing, they're thinking, they're watching this same world you're watching, but from a distance. Not because they don't care, but because they care too deeply to play along. They speak slower, they ask more than they answer, they pause before they post, and most of all, they don't perform. They think. And in a world that rewards performance, that makes them invisible. But they're still here, in small rooms, late at night, surrounded by old books and uncomfortable truths. They don't crave a platform. They crave clarity. They don't seek followers. They seek understanding. And they aren't easy to find. Because the system doesn't point you to them. You have to search. But once you do, you realize they never left. They were just buried under the noise. You won't find them screaming online. You'll find them tucked inside long podcasts, quiet corners of independent writing, and strange, untrendy conversations that make you stop and think. They're in books that don't go viral, essays no one quotes, forums where people ask questions instead of sell answers. They're in the background, not because they're weak, but because the spotlight repels them. Because they know that the truth doesn't need a stage. It just needs to be heard by the right kind of mind. And maybe that mind is yours. If you're still here, still listening, still thinking, then you're not here by accident. You're not part of the crowd. You never were. You're part of something slower, quieter, deeper, a kind of quiet rebellion that doesn't shout, but resists simply by choosing differently, by choosing depth over dopamine, books over noise, thought over performance, by following people who challenge you, not entertain you, by seeking discomfort, not applause, by building your own ecosystem for thought. It starts small. A book you actually finish, a conversation you don't try to win, a podcast that makes you pause instead of react. It grows. With every moment you resist the scroll, every time you stop and say, wait, does this actually make sense? And over time, you realize something. You're not the only one. There are others, scattered, silent, sharp, watching the same circus and choosing not to clap. You'll find them in places the algorithm forgot, in the voice of a quiet teacher, in the writing of a nameless essayist, in the friend who speaks less but sees more. They are not flashy, but they are real, and when you meet them, you'll know. Because you'll feel it, that rare sense of being understood without having to perform. That's the ecosystem worth building, one conversation at a time, one choice at a time. The system wants you loud, fast, and shallow, but maybe your greatest rebellion is to be quiet, patient, and deep. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to change something. Not the world, not overnight, but your mind, your life, your lens. Because that's where everything begins anyway. And if you've made it this far, still thinking, still breathing, still questioning, you already know this. You don't need the spotlight. You don't need the platform. You just need the truth. And maybe you've been one of the real thinkers all along, not here for attention, just here for what's real.